And I've worked on several commercial games, such as Tell Me Why or Life is Strange 2 at Dontnod, or Gloomhaven and Terraforming Mars at Asmodee Digital. I've also designed a few physical escape games for corporation. And besides the commercial things, I've also worked on a lot of non-commercial projects, such as Replicant the Search, which was a game from a game jam, a movie game jam. We were inspired by a scene from Blade Runner 2049. And there's Path of Sorrow, which was one of my school projects, where I was a narrative designer on it. So, but most importantly, there's Red Cells, and this is the game I'm currently working on. This was initially our end of study project, and we ended up working on it professionally. We found a publisher and everything. And Red Cells, its themes and world building are directly linked to this talk and the whole subject of desirable futures in video games I'm working on. And I can't talk much about the game, but this is about assisting communities research from a deeply traumatized world to make them trust each other, to make them communicate, so that they can organize better against the environment. And I'm not here to recap all the crap that happened in the past year, but still, capitalism is in crisis, and its strategy to get itself out of the crap it produced is authoritarianism, repression, fascism, and all its specters. So the context of this talk is, I think there's a political urge to present radical games. And there are good news, hopefully. Some big victories, or at least good and hopeful signs, are seen around the world. But most importantly, for me, there are the small local wins we can see like everywhere in the world. They are more direct and focused on specific problem. So I took the example of two French local resistance projects because this is where I live. There is L'Après-M in Marseille, which was the transformation of a McDonald's into a social fast food. And there's the Cinéma La Clé, which was an occupied cinema. So I volunteered there, and I can say the experience was delightful for me and all the people coming to watch a movie, in an independent citizen occupied cinema in the heart of Paris. There were no profit idea behind it, open pricing, and just proposing great movies, forgotten and snubbed by mainstream cinemas. And I could tell a lot more about it, but I'm not here for this. Ursula K. Le Guin once said that resistance and change often begin in art, and I do think this is true. I already said before, I think video games have a huge political potential. They can be a great guide to action. And there's a depolitization of video games and everything else happening in the world in general, mostly because of neoliberal dogmas, who uses the depolitization as a tool, as a weapon. So it's time to embrace politics in video games, even if some games are already doing it, obviously. And let's talk about capitalist realism. For those who don't know, it's some kind of ideological framework to view the effect of capitalism on basically everything and how it prevents us, game makers and other artists, to imagine a current alternative to that system. And in my opinion, capitalist realism in video game translates in two categories. There are the mainstream games and the wholesome games. And I'm not saying those games are bad or whatever. They can be great. But regarding the purpose of this talk, they are bad at proposing a current alternative to capitalism and all its dominant ideologies. They are bad at offering a desirable future. So they globally correspond to conservatism for the mainstream games and escapism for the wholesome games. And again, I'm not saying every wholesome games tend to escapism and every mainstream games tends to conservatism, but most mainstream games use formulas because of the financial risk involved. They use the same verbs, tell the same story, glorify the same individual errors. And this is what conservatism, and I think we can call it that way. And for the wholesome games, they put the protagonist isolated somewhere doing things, not harmful things compared to the mainstream games, but they're doing it for their own good and pleasure. The verbs are non-violent, but it doesn't mean they are helping creating a desirable future. It can create maybe a desirable environment, but it's mostly about the protagonist, for the hero. And escapism sets grounds to conservatism and vice versa, and this all lead to a rejection of progress, to immobilism. And as a medium, we need to go beyond that. So the word protagonist, which is often used to describe the playable character of the game, its etymology says first in importance actor. And in video games, the actor is mostly singular, so it translates into an individual hero. And the whole game is about their ascension, their progress, their empowerment. So I made this talk and I'm still working on the subject because individual heroes can save the world anymore. This fantasy needs to be abolished and replaced with the collective mind. And this is not about creating multiple heroes working together. The problem will be the same. It's about including the community, the collective mind, action by erasing the protagonist structure so that the collective mind become the first in importance actor. And how to do that? Let's start with the game writing subject. The themes of your game, they translate more easily through game writing to the player as it is literal and mostly straightforward. They're embodied through the story structure and the cast, and to replace the individual heroic figure, the way they're embodied need to drastically change. So the story structure shouldn't focus on an individual hero predisposed to be, protagonist, like they're on the one, the world needs to be saved, etc. And the cast shouldn't be at the player service. People gravitating around the protagonist are not here to be grow up, to progress, to gain power. So all of this link to consequences, like the playable character of your story needs to face consequences. They must be accountable for what they did. And in my opinion, game writing for games that explore the notion of desirable future, the notion of utopias, is the art of making the playable character facing consequences. And it's mostly part of the process to decenter the protagonist. If they face consequences, they are partially not the hero anymore. And let's talk about narrative design. Like, just by changing the game writing, by making it about the consequences, as I said, we can say the meaning of our work is to go against the dominant system. If our game still features, protagonists killing everything that moves, destroying everything that lives, or exploiting everything that exists, that just doesn't work. And when designing games exploring desirable future, the relation to the world is a major element. Like NPCs are not players' tool. They need to be designed with the aim of being a part of the world, not a tool of the world, and having some kind of authority on what's happening in it. And the systems also are a good way to make your utopian stems translate into the game. Like making important choices, with high stakes, shouldn't be under the exclusive authority of the protagonist. They shouldn't rule the whole world. The whole world, sorry. It's like the mantra: the customer is always right. And in video games, would be give the player what they want. So this is the enemy, I guess, of designing games that explore the notion of collective mind. And to bring the community, the collective mind to the forefront, the protagonist should be alone at the center of your design. We really need to decenter it and include the community and the world in it. And let's talk about verbs. Designers love talking about them. They really do, but unfortunately, the majority of the verbs commonly used in game serve the dominant ideologies. They gravitate around those pillars, which are destruction, exploitation, conquest, competition, and much more. And all the verbs can be like kill, gather, eradicate, fight, slay, and all of that. So to fight these dominant ideologies, I propose two categories of verbs to put the collective mind at the center and build desirable future. The first one would be the collective mind, of course. So cooperation is a key word for me when thinking about that. Like, this talk is not about erasing your individuality as a protagonist. This is about sharing the power they have on the game. So though there's the other category, which is about the desirable future. And for the most part, they take into account the existence of a past on which to rebuild. Taking down a post-capitalism approach, they're centered around the notion of care and shaping the future. And those verbs needs to be think as a political strategy, not a simple moral or ethical thing. and it's obviously not an ethical list, an exhaustive list, sorry. But to give you my work process on finding them, I've studied some of the big and local wins I was talking about at the beginning of this talk, and I drew from it some rather global verbs. Like, let's take Cinéma La Clé I was talking before. This project was about reclaiming a place from the capital, redefining it with new rules, protecting it against speculation, and resisting against the financial forces served by the police. And I really think we should be inspired by this kind of. So, as I said, designers love to talk about verbs, but they barely talk about the subject, as it is commonly admitted that it's I. But when thinking of the collective mind in video game, we should use we, like we reconstruct, we planify how to do it, etc. This is a collective decision, and I'm not talking about playing with a second player in cooperation, of course, but playing in cooperation with the world itself. And to conclude, there's a political urge to present games that feature desirable futures. And I know this is hard, especially when designing a commercial game. I've seen and still see this working on Red Cells. A lot of despicable things are rooted in the medium since its birth. But hey, it's worth trying, I guess. I hope. And to recap, how to involve the collective. The first thing is about making your protagonist faces the consequences of what they did, can be positive or negative. Decenter the protagonist from your design decision, like think the world beyond your protagonist and don't put them alone at the center of your systems. And use the care and cooperation verbs to amplify your desirable future themes. And again, it's not about erasing individualities, but it's about erasing individualism, which is like kind of rooted in the video game industry, I guess. And thank you for listening. I hope this talk was interesting to you. Here's my email, my Twitter, everything. If you have any questions or remark for later, or if you just want to follow what I'm doing. But most importantly, if you're interested in working and exploring deeper the subject, I'm definitely thinking of the idea to make a collective or something like that, maybe. I don't really know. So don't hesitate to drop me an email or private message on Twitter. I'd love to work with, more people from various and diverse background to have the most perspective possible. So if you got interested, feel free. And yeah, are there any questions? I guess I'm done on my side.